Brown would be one of the most important figures of his day. He was born in 1800 in Torrington, Connecticut. His actions with anti-slave movements and raids in the South would lead to his execution in 1859 and push America to the path of civil war.
The Bleeding Kansas was a series of violent political confrontations involving anti-slavery, free states, and pro-slavery border ruffians. It would be an event that would set the scene for a bloody civil war.
Brown was born on May 9, 1800. He grew up in the shadow of rising tensions between the American North and Southern states. While he was against slavery from an early age, his true passion in the matter would emerge when he traveled to the city of Springfield, Massachusetts. He had gone with a co-worker in order to do business in the city. He would come to know people who, like him, opposed the ideas of slavery.
Owning slaves is no act of God, but that of heathens. As the situation is, I vow to fight those of the South who deny the pursuit of truth, justice, liberty, and the American way.
Brown would dedicate every moment to turning Springfield into a safe haven for runaway slaves and anti-slave movements, as well as making a pivotal stop on the Underground Railroad. When the Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850, Brown would establish an armed group of men to prevent the capture of runaway slaves in Springfield. They were known as the League of Gilead, and no slave would again be captured in the city of Springfield.
In 1850, Brown and his men would rent a house in Maryland in response to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The country would be divided by this act, which proclaimed Kansas a slave state. Brown's plan was to amass his forces, capture enemy weapons, and incite a slave rebellion in the United States. It would be his most famous, ambitious, and dangerous raid yet.
On October 16, 1859, Brown and his men would launch their attack on the American Army Arsenal at Harper's Ferry, located in modern-day West Virginia. The plan, to capture as many weapons as possible and arm as many slaves as possible. They captured the arsenal easily, but would need slave reinforcements to assist them. When only the U.S. Marines arrived in the morning, commanded by Robert E. Lee, Brown and his men would go down fighting and not surrender.
I fight for the liberty and freedom of a nation and the equality of its people. Our Declaration of Independence states that all men are created equal under the eyes of God. I crusade now, in His name, to rid our country from the stain of slavery.
He was hung on December 2nd, 1959.
The American people in the South would see Brown as a terrorist, and as a martyr in the North. He divided a country, and would plunge it into a bloody civil war that would claim the lives of more Americans than every other combined.
At this time, there were two major groups of people that were crucial to the Bleeding Kansas event. There were the Free Staters, which was the name given to those settlers in the Kansas Territory who opposed slavery to Kansas. Many Free Staters were abolitionists from New England. Border Ruffians were pro-slavery activists from the state of Missouri who crossed the border into Kansas Territory to force the acceptance of slavery there.
The Bleeding Kansas, Bloody Kansas, or otherwise the Border War, was a series of violent political confrontations involving the anti-slavery Free Staters and pro-slavery Border Ruffians. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 set the scene by allowing the territory of Kansas to decide for itself whether it would be a free or slave state, a situation known as popular sovereignty. With the passage of the Nebraska Act, thousands of pro- and anti-slavery supporters flooded the state. Violent clashes soon occurred, especially once border ruffians crossed over from the south to sway the vote to the pro-slavery side.
Several constitutions for the future state of Kansas were created, some pro- and anti-slavery. However, the Constitution died. Kansas eventually entered the Union in 1861 as a free state. Some major key events of the Bleeding Kansas were the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which Congress passed in 1854. The Kansas-Nebraska Act created the territories of Kansas and Nebraska. It also mandated that Kansas and Nebraska hold referendums to determine whether slavery should exist in the new territory. This describes popular sovereignty, that people decide the laws of their land.
Before the referendum, however, people poured into Kansas from other areas. Slave owners from Missouri crossed the border so that they could vote in the referendum for slavery to exist in Kansas. Seeing this, abolitionists from other parts of the country, mainly the Northeast, came to vote no and prohibited slavery in the territory. These people eventually clashed, with many murders and massacres taking place. It earned Kansas the nickname Bleeding Kansas and served as a precursor to the American Civil War.
One of the most publicized and key events of the Bleeding Kansas was in 1856, when the border ruffians burnt the town of Lawrence. One day later, violence occurred on the floor of the U.S. Senate when Preston Brooks of Southern Carolina attacked Senator Charles Sumner in Massachusetts with a cane. After Sumner spoke out against Southerners responsible for the violence in Kansas.
The Kansas-Nebraska Act also caused the collapse of both the Whig and Democratic parties. The party's southern wings voted the Southern Democrats against their northern counterparts. For the first time in history, the Whigs were never able to reunite after this catastrophic divide.
Americans were still divided over the Kansas issue as the election of 1856 approached, so parties nominated Kansas neutral candidates in hopes of overcoming the growing sectionalism.
Are you crazy? Slavery must be abolished in Kansas.
We need slaves.